And I'm Pastor Darrell Etienne, and you just tuned in to the Powerful Life broadcast with Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant is empowering the world through the Word. We're excited about this new message that Dr. Bryant is about to bring to the nations. Stay tuned because God's got a word with your name on it.
The biggest impact of inflation isn't attributable to oil, nor is it in fact connected to failed stocks. But the greatest impact on the economy is the hefty responsibility of raising a child. In 2013, Mark Leno, the U.S. Department Secretary of Agriculture, he released a study that discovered that a child born in 2012, to raise a child born in 2012 will cost you somewhere in the orbit of $245,000. And if that child plans on going to college, then you have to double that amount. That's 25% higher than what it was to rear a child in the 1960s. The cost of raising children is economically burdensome. Basketballs, marbles, jump rope, none of those prices have gone up. But private education, extracurricular activities are now being accessed not just by those who IRS would consider affluent. The psychologist Maslow constructed a hierarchy of human needs, from the basic to the complex. It is his contention that the very first level and layer of human need is that which is physiological, or food. In the 1960s, watch this, in the 1960s, if you were raising a child, 24% of your income had to have in fact been dedicated to food. 24% in the 1960s. In this hour, food only constitutes 16% of your budget. Astonishingly, it is cheaper to feed children now than it was in the 1960s. It's cheaper to feed them now. The Master, however, said to us that man must not live by bread alone. And the people around you who are secularists and as a consequence are not saved. The people who are around you don't realize what it costs you just to get your spirit fed. They don't realize the appetite that you have for truth and for light, and how it upsets your stomach to just be fed that which is fluff and processed. But you need something substantive. Do you have any idea how many saints are spiritually malnourished? How many people go to church but still don't get anything that meets the need of their soul? The reason why you're here on this Sunday in the afternoon is because there is something in your spirit that hungers and thirsts for righteousness' sake. You didn't come to church because you didn't have anything to do. You came to church because there is a great aching inside of you that says, I need God to fill it. And the reality is, if we can be transparent, I need him to fill it because there is an area that is broken, an area that is vulnerable, and an area that which is superficial cannot meet. And so the first area is, in fact, that which is physiological or food. The second area that you have a need, here it is safety. Safety in terms of housing. Where am I going to live? Is there going to be shelter over my head? Clothing and health care. Clothing children, hear this, is cheaper today than it was in the 60s. Actually, watch this, 50% cheaper. It's hard to tell that clothes is cheaper when teenage girls are walking around half-dressed. It's hard to tell. Child clothes are now available at a discount when teenage boys are dressing like athletes with no contract and rappers with no skill set. Kudos to the Commander-in-Chief for extending universal health care, which has had a dramatic impact on reducing infant mortality. But it's done nothing to curb, hear this, police from fracturing spines. So while we're appreciative for universal health care, it still does not exonerate you from police officers who feel as if they have a right to in fact abuse you with no cause. Neither does universal health care do anything about black-on-black crime, on how it is that we kill, maim, and shoot one another. And while less is spent on food, more is spent on complex medical challenges that we did not have to fight through at this pronounced rate as we did in the 60s. So more is being spent now on asthma. More is having to be spent now by parents for autism. More is being spent now for ADD, obesity, and dyslexia. And somehow or another, we have had to shell out more money for issues that we didn't even have to address several years ago, but have become common fare in today's broken and sick society. The third need is self-esteem and transportation, according to Dr. Maslow. And I want you to pinpoint something that is critical, vital, and astonishing, that amazingly Maslow has merged self-actualization with transportation. Self-esteem in the same category as transportation. In other words, what it is that you learned in elementary school, your attitude is connected to your altitude. The cost, watch this, of making them, here it is, the cost of making your child understand there is a price to being popular. And that the call on your life from God is not for you to be popular. The call on your life is to be righteous. Do you know how much it costs a conscientious parent to try to rear and to bring out all of the shampoo residue left from brainwashing after your child is bombarded with reality television? To sit there and to underscore to your daughter she is not a housewife if she ain't married. Y'all not talking back to me. To try to underscore to your son he is not a baller if he's living at home. The price that is, in fact, not really spoken of is that the greatest level of debt in America is not because of credit cards, it is because of student loans. Education is now somewhere in the orbit of 6 to 16% of the average family's budget. And to pay that cost is giving clear evidence in the lack of confidence of public school curriculum. Because now they're giving out certificates of completion in place of high school diplomas. In case you don't know, that option was not available in the 60s. You had to either step up or you were going to get left back. But now, because our public schools are now the prison pipeline They don't care whether your child can conjugate verbs, have any semblance of sentence structure, or are able to reduce fractions. All they care, can they punch out license tags? And you are setting your child up for failure by doing homework for them, or not even going over it with them. The average African American who is in this room watching on television or online, the average African American post high school does not read a book from cover to cover. I think this is a good place for me to tell you, Jet magazine is not a book. Public schools, ladies and gentlemen, are not free. Your taxes subsidize the expense. And so I'm trying to figure out how you do not put a demand on what you pay for. From 1960 to 2012, child care and education have skyrocketed by 1,000%. Did you hear what I just said? After school care, babysitters, hear me, extended care, and private schools have gone up from the 1960s by 1,000%. And even with all of that, still these jokers don't have common sense and don't understand their historical placement, that they are not there because of quasi-intelligence. They are there because of a generation before them that made a sacrifice for them to be able to have access. And in the words of Dr. King, that they would not be judged based off of the color of their skin, but the content of their character. But it's hard to tell your child that when their jeans are behind their behind, when they don't want to tie their tennis shoes. I don't understand how it is. I went to a high school last week right here in Baltimore, speaking to high school students, and they got tattoos all over their neck, shoulders, legs, with no job. So I'm trying to figure out who's paying for it. On your neck, if you can read it. But you only given the translation of a tattoo artist who dropped out of high school, and you think they know how to write Chinese? Y'all will thank me later. Much of the increase of raising a child can be explained by the increase in the number of having, watch this, 2 contributors to the child's welfare. In the 1960s, whether you were black or white, the average family only had one stream or one source of income. And out of that, they were somehow or another able to keep a roof over their head, food on the table, clothes on their back. In the 1960s, homes were sustained by one check. Family sizes, watch this, in this generation, in this hour, in the 21st century, in this moment, family size has decreased, but the need has increased. Pause here for your logical thinking. So your parents, or for some of us, your grandparents, raised more children with less money. And here you are making more money than your parents saw in the 60s. Watch this, with only 1.5 child, and that Negro can't read. Y'all don't like me today. Something has gone awry when we have more, but we're producing less. It wasn't until 1910 that America adopted the Uniform Desertion and Non-Support Act, making it a crime for the father not to support their children. Watch this, because by law, you had to support them by 16. You have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, from an aerial view, that 1910, therefore, began the open faucet on the prison pipeline. Because in 1910, it made it, watch this, a criminal offense not to pay child support, while it is that they red marked the areas where African Americans were living and would not employ our fathers and grandfathers, hear me very carefully, and in order for your grandmother to receive any welfare subsidy, by law, a man couldn't be in the house. Y'all not talking back to me. So they began arresting black men because they could not find a charge, even though they set up a system where they could not provide for their own children. And in some instances, in order for the child to have access to health care and food and housing, by law in the United States, you couldn't have a man present. So it was, in fact, the second extenuated step of slavery, of breaking up the foundation of the black family. Many of your fathers, grandfathers left, watch this, not because they were derelict, but because they were trying, how can I make sure my family's needs are met without me having to go to jail? I think this is a good time for me to pause and tell you, so that you do not look at the news in a vacuum. I think it's a good time for me to tell you that 3 weeks ago in North Charleston, South Carolina, Walter Scott was shot 8 times in his back, not for robbing a bank or a corner store, but over child support. God, I might as well preach to myself. So the ante was raised from 1910 to 1950. In 1950, the Social Security Act made an amendment whereby the federal government can begin requiring welfare agencies to notify law enforcement when the state has to take care of an unsupported child. So it becomes a federal offense, you all stay with me, that social services and welfare workers had to then become operating as parole officers. So when the social servant agent came in the house, she's checking around in the house for shoes. Y'all ain't talking back to me. Whose jacket is this? Where did this cigarette come from? And so people who don't even have any grasp of law begin to operate as a uniformed authority. Here it is, to make sure black men were not present in the life of children, and the only way you could get that subsidy is that the father could not be present. Now fast forward to the 21st century, is that the Fox News would now indicate that the reason why we're dealing with all that we're dealing with is the absence of fathers. I might as well say it because y'all act like you don't like what I'm saying. So I'm on Fox News the other day, and Fox News asked me, Dr. Bryant, do you believe what is happening in Baltimore is an evidence or a reflection of fatherlessness in the black community? I said, sir, you are completely out of order, because I want to remind you that Freddie Gray had 2 daddies. He had one father that graduated with honors from Morgan State University with a degree in engineering. Y'all don't like me here. And he had a stepfather in his life. And if you want me to go further, can I remind you, Michael Brown had a father who was present and evident in his life, who in fact had shared and joint custody. And before you start tripping, can I remind you, Trayvon Martin was killed walking to his daddy's house. So how dare you try to set up as if black men are not taking care of their children? They are working double and overtime trying to make a way for their children. Don't y'all dare buy into the propaganda that our men are not stepping up to the plate. Look around you and see these brothers who are working until they're tired on their feet, but they're doing everything they can to put a roof over their head and put food on the table. Don't you let America brainwash you into believing our men are not responsible and don't love their children. And so this Social Security Act said, I'm giving power to social workers. If you see a man in that house, call the authorities, because they're out of order. I'm glad, because even now in 2015, that law is still in the books. Congressional Black Caucus has not asked for its amendment. Neither has the Latino Hispanic Coalition. That even today, if you check the record, there's still the Social Security Act that suggests that if in fact you are not supporting your child, you are in fact a prime candidate for judicial justice. when without blinking they will charge our young boys with adult sentences. That right now in Baltimore we've got 300 teenagers in the adult jail. Y'all ain't talking nothing to me. Who do I call about Johns Hopkins exposing thousands of our babies to lead poisoning and ain't giving out one scholarship? Who do I call to say you are responsible? Because the reality is that under the Reagan era, you put ketchup in the cafeteria and tried to tell poor black people it's a vegetable. Who do I call for a lapse in child support when your daddies came into the slave quarters and raped our grandmothers and mothers and you ain't paid a dime yet? And if you don't think we your children, roll up that sleeve and let's do a blood test or open that mouth for a swab. When are you gonna take responsibility of the children you dragged here through the Middle Passage and left in your colonies without ever giving reparations or 40 acres and a mule? You gotta take care of these children. And don't trip. It ain't just Ben Affleck's family. And so they wonder why we had to start marching downtown. Why it is that we went down Pratt Street and Light Street. Y'all ain't talking back to me. We didn't go down there for no Ravens tickets. We went down there to remind the government, you owe our children. You promised us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but you're gonna arrest a boy for breaking